Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Palmer Luckey is the CEO of Anduril Industries, and he recently just did a podcast, and I want to react to the analysis he gave in his podcast around Putin, the nuclear war, or the potential nuclear war, what's going on in China, Taiwan. There's a lot of different things to get into. Quick note on Palmer Luckey, CEO of Anduril Industries. He built Oculus back in 2012, sold it to Facebook for about $2 billion in 2014. It's a VR-based startup, and obviously he's been amazing in the tech world. And Anduril Industries is a company that is unapologetically supportive of the West and the government, and the United States government. Very similar to what Palantir is looking for. Founder fund, Peter Thiel, co-founder of Palantir, also has funded Anduril Industries. So a lot of different ties to Palantir, and ultimately a lot of the same ethos, which is let's help countries that can't be helped, that don't have the help that they need, and let's figure out a way to beat Russia and China doing some of the crazy things they're doing. I thought his analysis on this podcast was really, really important, and actually set a really good geopolitical analysis, or the stage for geopolitical analysis around the Russia-Ukraine situation. So let's get into it right now.
Russia, as we're kind of shooting this, the last few days, Putin has made some slightly scary remarks. The word nuclear has been thrown around a few times. So in terms of how this plays out, we're kind of shooting this in like a first week of October. Like, where do you see this going from here in the next few months in the Ukraine conflict?
I think that Putin is very likely to use a tactical nuke. If only to make an example. I'm not convinced that
Could you explain what a tactical nuke means? Because for a lot of us,
people might have heard it in video games, but not quite understand. There's a difference in doctrine between the United States and Russia. The United States has taken the position that nuclear weapons are a strategic weapon. It is only to be used to either deter or respond to an equivalent nuclear exchange. So huge bombs on big missiles that can take out large cities is the name of the game for the United States. We actually used to have tactical nukes. We disassembled them all decades ago. Now, what is a tactical nuke? A tactical nuke is one that you don't use as a strategic weapon, but a tactical weapon, not to win a war, but to win a battle. You say, I'm going to use this nuke to blow up that tank formation over there, to destroy a carrier group that is sitting off my coast, to destroy a wing of bombers that are coming over me. In other words, a tactical weapon that can be used in a individual battle to accomplish a tactical objective as part of the normal warfighting process, not necessarily in response to the use of nuclear weapons. Russia does have tactical nuclear weapons. They do believe in them as part of their standard warfighting doctrine. They do. It is basically the way they see themselves as being able to go toe-to-toe with NATO or the United States in a conventional conflict. And their bet, by the way, is that the United States and our allies will not respond to a tactical nuclear weapon with a strategic nuclear weapon. And I wish I could say otherwise, but they're actually probably betting correctly that we aren't going to stop them. Now, I'm predicting the future, and that's very dangerous to do. I'm not a fortune teller, but I think it's important to understand that Putin does see nuclear weapons as on the table because of that. A lot of people misunderstand. When they hear him saying he's going to use nuclear weapons, they think of the U.S. nuclear policy, where you're basically starting World War III. Putin doesn't look at it that way, even if we do. He says, no, this is the way we fight. This is how we're going to counter aggression from the West, is we're going to use tactical nuclear weapons to accomplish strategic objectives. I don't think he's going to go and use a nuke in the maximally optimal way. I don't think he's going to go and blow up the biggest city that he can find. I think there's a very, very high likelihood that we see employment of nuclear weapons to either just, send a message by blowing up some remote warehouse somewhere, or perhaps to achieve a real tactical objective, like blowing up an airfield or taking out a large, heavily built up military area. So that's what I suspect is going to happen.
Now, this is really interesting because, you've got a founder of a company that works heavily in the defense space, basically saying he thinks there's a very high likelihood there's not going to be necessarily a nuclear war as a result of him using a tactical nuke, which again, he described what the sort of use case is for a tactical nuke. But the potential for him actually being able to use it is high, and it has a potential. Now, the thing is, if he does this, the United States is not going to launch a nuke. It's just, and he goes on to talk about this in the podcast, we're not going to do it because we're not getting into World War III. And so the scary thing here is, like, he feels he can do whatever he wants. He has Russian oil money that's still funding all of his operations. And as a result of him feeling that he can do whatever he wants and having the potential to do it, he might just end up doing it. And that is kind of the scary thing here, specifically in the nuclear threats for what's going on.
It's not good.
You mentioned right at the beginning that, the direction where the war is going, it doesn't look good. This is, I'm guessing, a part of it. What did you mean outside of this particular, like the nuclear part?
Well, I mean, that's part of it, is that
Yeah.
he like Putin is willing to escalate.
Yeah.
The European Union is headed for winter, and
Yeah.
they really, really, really need Russian oil and gas if they're going to survive the winter. And so
Should not have shut down all those nuclear plants.
God, we could just have a whole talk about that. What a disaster. Anti-nuclear people.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to take you off guard, but that's why they're in this place.
Yeah, we have to do it at a different time. But I guess when I say things are getting worse, we're in this situation where Putin basically bet, I can do whatever I want, and they're still going to buy billions of dollars continuously of my oil and gas. And the worst part is he was absolutely right. Like, people, you hear these countries and these leaders saying, we stand with Ukraine, we reject the violence. Also, we're giving Russia billions of dollars that they are using to run their entire war machine. I mean, it is not a good situation, and it shows that we're only willing to stand up to these dictatorships to the extent that it doesn't hurt our comfort. This is actually the worst part of this. If you look back to World War II, they did things that were very uncomfortable. Food rationing, mandatory lights out before sundown so that bombers couldn't find anybody. I mean, if you left your light on, it was like you would be exiled from the city. It was an enormous deal. And people were doing things like not using their heating, huddling in blankets all day so that they could survive, so that they wouldn't have to use the limited fuel supplies that could instead go into Allied bombers and Allied warships. I mean, that was how we liberated Europe. It was because of people making those sacrifices. And now you have people saying, oh, we support Ukraine. Meanwhile, like, when people say, oh, Germany needs oil and gas in order to not freeze to death this winter, it's like, wait a second, let's get real. Nobody's going to freeze to death this winter. You can wear some warm clothes. You can bring back peat and coal burning. Like, there's so many things you can do. But everyone's like, oh, but what we really mean is we don't want energy prices to go up. And we don't want to have to wear warmer clothing in our houses. And we also don't want to miss our carbon dioxide emissions goals by bringing some of our coal plants online. And I wish people would be more clear about this, because they try to make it, oh, we can't beat Russia because our people will freeze to death. Imagine if they went out and were honest. We're like, we can't beat Russia because we really don't want to miss our carbon targets, and people would rather wear one sweater than two. I mean, it's absolutely nuts.
So maybe
this was an interesting point, and that's kind of the point that I wanted to react to here, which is that the argument he is making is that the level of discomfort people would need to take in Europe, and I'm not in Europe, so, take it with a grain of salt what I'm saying here. Obviously, I'm not under the pressure of having to wear two sweaters, but that level of pressure is something that his argument is too strong for people in the modern day. And by the way, I think if that was in America, that would be the same case. I don't think we would want to wear two sweaters. And what happened in World War II is you had to take those dramatic measures because you could not continue you had to ration resources because you could not continue letting Germany get as powerful as it did, which means you had to not be able to accept certain things from them. If Russia is currently doing some of the things that are not good and that's affecting Europe and it's affecting global society and it's killing millions of people in a unjust way, then one of the things you don't want to do is keep giving them money for oil. But the problem is, if you're not willing to become uncomfortable and they keep getting money for oil, they now have a precedent of feeling like, if these guys are not going to stop me from using nukes, these guys are not going to shut down my air force, if these guys being other European countries, are not going to stop taking my oil and gas, then I can do whatever the hell I want. And that right there, that's the reason I wanted to highlight this clip. This is an interesting piece of analysis from Palmer Luckey, who's, again, the head of a defense company, basically saying that is the strategic problem with everything that's going on right now. And until we're able to resolve that key issue, until there's some negotiation, until there's some way for both sides to get what they want, or at least do the strategic concessions they need to do in order to get to a standstill, if this war just keeps dragging on, then Putin feels like he has full liberty to do whatever he wants. What he wants. And if Putin feels like he has full liberty to do whatever he wants, then he might just end up doing whatever he wants. That's the scary part about this entire situation. I'm not, the biggest geopolitical analyst in the world. I'm trying to understand this more day by day because a lot of this stuff actually affects stocks and it affects finance and it affects investing. And if we have more geopolitical crises, supply chains get flipped upside their head. It's kind of why I think Palantir is a good investment over the next couple of years, because if we have more geopolitical crises, I actually think Palantir will thrive and do well. But I don't think it's fear-mongering from a guy who runs a defense company to say these types of things. Alex Karp a couple months ago said the threat of nuclear war is the highest it's ever been, and everyone thought he was fear-mongering. No one believed him. Well, look at what's happening right now. It seems like the threat of it is the highest it's ever been. And I think we should take these things seriously, is the point I'm trying to make, and try to do a lot more deeper due diligence in understanding why these things are happening from the macro and from the micro. Because if we don't, then we end up just believing that these things aren't happening when you got the heads of defense companies saying, actually, no, they are happening. He also goes on to make a point in this podcast that was very interesting, that Zelensky reached out to him 2017, 5 years ago, saying, hey, we like what you're doing. We need this stuff. And the reason we need the stuff that you're doing on Border Patrol in the United States, when Anduril Industries was working on like hardware and software for Border Patrol, was because he was like, we've got a border problem and it's Russia and we know they're going to invade. And that was a very interesting part of the podcast because of geopolitical and social problems, he was not able to sell his software and hardware to the Ukrainian military back in 2017, even though Zelensky said, hey, we know they're coming, they're going to do this. Lo and behold, 5 years later, they actually ended up doing it. So interesting stuff to see what's going on right now. Would love your thoughts and analysis. Please leave them below. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you in the next one.